So we'll get started. Good day to everybody, and thank you so much for being here. I know you're signing in from various parts of the world, whether you're joining from the office, your home, maybe in between your commute. I welcome you. My name is Ginny Uppal. I serve as a director at the Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy at Ashoka University. We're based in the currently very rainy New Delhi area. On behalf of all of us at CSIB, I am very honored to co-host this important convening with the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University, as well as our partners at Accelerate Indian Philanthropy. They're co-hosting the Breakout on Tech. I want to thank both our partners for walking this journey with us. We've gathered here today at what feels like a pivotal moment. The world is not short on crisis, human-made or natural. However, what we're here to discuss today is a deeper shift in the philanthropic world, not just about changes in where philanthropic capital is coming from, where it's going, but about newer opportunities to shape the narrative, newer values which are influencing decision-making, and newer models which are emerging to define the future of giving, some of which we will discuss today. Just yesterday, I checked our registration list, and while we have a few hundred registrations, what I found interesting is that all of you are joining us from many countries. I counted about 37 as of yesterday. And this tells me two things. First, that this topic, the changing face of global philanthropy, resonates far and wide. And the second, that there is a shared urgency across geographies for all of us to just make better sense of the macro trends, the fast shifting landscape, and to reimagine what's next and what can we do about it. Now, today's convening focuses on Asia, its philanthropic journey, its complexity, and its emergence, not only as a destination, but also perhaps a driver of giving. Traditionally, global philanthropy has often meant capital and ideas which flow from the west to east, from north to south, developed countries to the so-called developing ones. But I'm sure you will agree that those lines are blurring and probably blurring fast. Over the last 2 decades, economic growth in parts of Asia has sparked new wealth, and with it, new philanthropic actors, leaders. Many of our panelists, and many of you, either represent or work with these new and emerging leaders. And now we are seeing more homegrown institutions. We're seeing newer regional models of giving. We're seeing an entire generation of young people of an entrepreneurial mindset who are choosing the social sector not as a fallback, but as a first calling. That is reason to be optimistic. On the flip side, the pace and scale of recent changes, whether it's geopolitical tension, the AI breakthroughs, or the dramatically declining Western funding, it's been dizzying. And one might say it's giving some of us a bit of a whiplash. So this event is indeed very timely, as many of you have shared. But let's think of it as the start of a conversation. In the short time we have today, a couple of hours, we're going to explore the potential consequence of these macro trends and what philanthropic leadership, especially regional leadership, can and should look like in this moment. So that will be the focus of the plenary session for the next hour or so. The policy breakout is going to discuss how do we better leverage and perhaps shape cross-border funding, given the policy environment. And the tech breakout, which is happening in parallel, will explore how we can leverage AI and tech not only to scale solutions for populations at large, but for the social sector itself. But before we dive in, it is my greatest pleasure to introduce someone that I've known for more than a year, that has been a long friend of CSIP, and who has also been a steadfast voice in the space of philanthropy and its many global manifestations. Dean Amir Pesik of the Lilly School of Philanthropy. It is my honor to co-moderate the plenary with him. Dean Pesik has been steering Lilly for over 10 years. I think soon after it became the world's first school of philanthropy. And I think to this day, it is the only standalone school of philanthropy in the world. Once again, I welcome you all heartily. Thank you for making the time. I suggest you put aside your phones, be present fully for the next couple of hours. And thank you for being here. Dean Pesik, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ginny, and congratulations for putting together this inspiring event where we're going to talk about uh, crucial developments in philanthropy. And so I'm very pleased that we're here together. When we started adopted the global philanthropy indices, this is exactly the kind of convening that we had in mind, and we hoped it would engender and stimulate. As you say, the changes around us are dizzying. There are certain discontinuities taking place that are challenging to philanthropy. But one of the things that we always think about when we look historically around across the broad swath of human evolution is that philanthropy has always been the history of the moral imagination. So the possibilities ahead of us and the philanthropy can inspire are something that give us hope and challenge us to think about what can be done in these circumstances when there truly are challenges. But at the same time, there are resources, both financial, spiritual, and voluntary, that can be brought to that can be brought to the challenges that await us. I'll maybe just say a few words on the Global Philanthropy Environment Index that will be a part of our conversations today. And the purpose of the Global Environment Index is, in general, has been specifically to gather knowledge that would be systematic across countries and from within countries to help improve decision making, not only for philanthropists, but the decision making of the environment within which philanthropy operates. And that includes private actors in the commercial sectors, and perhaps most importantly, the governments that generate public policy. So it is a globally collaborative endeavor of some scale, covering 95 economies, 15 regions. We had over 170 contributing experts evaluate six factors across countries. The six factors are the ease of operating of philanthropic organization, tax and fiscal incentives, cross-border philanthropic flows, the political environment, the economic environment, and then to the social cultural environment. And so there are rankings involved, but the rankings are not the purpose itself. The purpose of the endeavor is really to engender better conversations, better informed thoughts and measures regarding philanthropy across all the important players as well. So Ginny, I don't know if you want me to emphasize some of the current findings that we had right now, or whether we should reserve more time for the wonderful panelists that you have put together.
Up to you if you wanted to take a minute or two to talk about trends. I do find, I agree with you. The one thing I find interesting about rankings is not the moment in time recording, but more the trends and how things have been changing over the years. And I know CSIP has partnered for the ranking as a representative for India for a third time in, I guess, 6 years or something. So it'll be interesting, yeah, if there are any trends that you're observing that we should hear about.
Absolutely. We value our partnership with CSIP, and one of the values of this kind of exercise is the fact that it's repeated over time. There's a longitudinal element to it as well, and with many studies that are of large trends at the macro level, there is a lot of stability over time, and so these very large trends do not change on a dime, so to speak, as well, but. I'll just mention some of the key findings that in Asia, that the highest score received was from Singapore across all six of the factors that we had as well. And if you look at globally the situation, Western Europe has the most favorable philanthropic environment. On the other hand, Latin America is the most challenging. And East Asia has a favorable ranking, whereas South and Southeast Asia are so much more, a little bit more challenged as well. Overall, when we look at the trends over the last three iterations of the Global Philanthropy Environment Index, we have seen some improvements in the political environment, as well as some challenges. It's quite uneven. The highest scoring factors have been the ease of operating of a philanthropic organization and the social cultural environment. In Asia, we have seen improving tax incentives, and challenges, obviously, that are globally in terms of the constraining of the space for civil society as well. At the same time, there are interesting innovations, collaborations among philanthropic organizations, digital adaptations, and the availability of new technologies that are engendering and encouraging people to get more involved. Um, Crowdfunding is another very positive development, interest in gender equity and social justice as well. I will mention just a couple of things in terms of government innovations. There was in Taiwan private-public partnerships. In Japan, the government has allowed dormant funds to be used for social issues, and in Singapore, the government has these proactive measures to encourage philanthropy as part of national development as well. We also know that across the world and in Asia as well, there have been challenges at the same time as we have seen some innovations in terms of public-private collaboration, but in general, worries and suspicions about cross-border activity from many governments as well, which at the end of the day makes these kind of conversations even more important because it is very simplistic to see from the government perspective philanthropy either as a spigot that can be opened to fulfill the needs where the government does not have increased resources, or to see philanthropy as a threat to the authority of the government. And those simplistic views limit the ability for philanthropy to achieve the good outcomes that we know it can achieve. So these kind of conversations that help inform both private sector and public sector partners are increasingly important. And when we bring examples from different countries to the table, informing public policy officials across borders, both in terms of what is happening in comparative context in different countries, but also the benefits of cross-border collaboration, that can open the conversations among public policy officials so that they don't descend into the overly simplistic how can private philanthropy substitute for government funding, or else how is it a challenge to government authority? So I'm very much looking forward to learning from our amazing panelists to see how these initial findings are being interpreted and how they might be used to further the cause of philanthropy in the region. And as Ginny broadly put it, there really is a transformation afoot. The consensus that we had after the last the two global wars that took place in the 20th century that led to a very broad multilateralist consensus about what human development would be and how it would be taken forward through the UN, and what was largely a Western dominated paradigm is shifting. And of course, Asia is positioned to play a major role going forward. So as we worry about the decline of the particular consensus that came out about a century ago, we see, I think, some hope in the energy and the possibilities that are emerging in this region. So thank you so much for allowing me to say a few words about kind of the high level findings, but also kind of the spirit and the purpose behind the global philanthropy endeavor that you are partnering with us on.
Thank you so much, Dean Pesek. And you're right, like any good index, there is so much ground to cover that it can get pretty interesting. Today's focus is obviously going to be Asian philanthropy and the opportunity. So we are in the middle of a seismic shift. And you brought up, the last two world wars. A lot of people keep bringing up, 70, 80 years ago, things were shifting very rapidly. And like in the middle of any huge shift, while there's bad news, it opens up opportunities for new kinds of models. And that's really going to be the focus of today's conversation. What is possible now? So with that, I'd like to get started with our plenary session. We're going to go through a few questions. We also want to open the stage for those who are participating. Some of your questions were incorporated because you were kind enough to put it during your registrations. So we'll have a conversation. It's really meant to be more conversational style. I won't go through the bios of our panelists, but I will give a brief introduction just to set the stage. Pritha is here, who heads Britspan India now, but between her time at Britspan and Dalbar, over 20 years, she has acquired tremendous depth and breadth of knowledge. And particularly her unique vantage point was interesting to me because she has worked with donors, nonprofits, government entities, and has had the opportunity to watch and study trends over the last couple of decades. So thank you, Pritha, for joining us. Arnav Kapur is here from Gates Foundation. He's very well known to us at CSIP in India, obviously. His long tenure at Gates Foundation across policy, nonprofits, particularly his passionate commitment to ecosystem development is something we value greatly. We're also fortunate to count Arnav as one of the advisory council members at CSIP. So thank you, Arnav, for being here. Dylan Liu joins us from Institute of Philanthropy, which itself is a new, interesting initiative coming out of Hong Kong Jockey Club. And they have put together a philanthropic collective, which is regional across Asia, to drive regional leadership. And their motto is, in Asia and for Asia. So we're very happy to have you here, Dylan. Welcome to you all. I'm going to kick off a question and then, let's see how it goes. And in some cases, maybe some of the panelists might want to take the question or you can all jump in. But as I mentioned earlier, over the last couple of decades, Asian philanthropists have been stepping up to lead regionally. There have been Western American philanthropists mixed with Asian philanthropists. And so now we've had a little bit of time to observe the differences in approaches. And my question, starting Pritha with you, is in your mind, what changes, whether it's practically, strategically, when local capital is driving an intervention as opposed to foreign funding? Do you notice any difference in how they prioritize in approaches, outcomes, measurement? What changes in your mind?
Thanks, Jenny, and congratulations to CSIP and the Lilly School for hosting this at your milestone year. It's great to be here. So first, I'd like to maybe just set the stage with some data so that we all understand what we're talking about when we mention the term Asian philanthropy, which in itself, I would think, is a term that's been coined very recently because there is no one beast called Asian philanthropy or an Asian philanthropic institution. But over the last couple of years, I think this has assumed greater significance as work of institutions like AVPN in particular in Asia, the new Institute of Philanthropy. In fact, we've been partnering with them deeply over the last couple of years to put a spotlight on what it means to be an Asian philanthropist. And just a few statistics to set the backdrop for our discussion. First, Asia is actually home to the largest number of billionaires across any other region in the world. As per The Economist just about a year ago, close to 900 billionaires live in Asia. But that said, 50% of the philanthropy in this region is actually driven by corporate or state-linked foundation, as opposed to at the global stage where that number is close to 30%, i.e. majority of funding at the global stage comes from private foundations compared to Asia, which is more state-linked and corporate in comparison. Second, close to 50%, again, half of the Asian top foundations were set up in the last 20 years, so are fairly young and still learning and evolving, compared to barely 1/5 of the global top foundations being set up recently. So that's, again, a very distinct characteristic of this region. Third, a majority of Asian philanthropies, irrespective of their form, are actually operating, i.e. they don't make grants, but they actually operate programs. Some of them are hybrid. They might both operate and make grants. Fourth, and importantly, I think in terms of the issue areas, Asia has been unique that although health and education still get a lion's share of philanthropic funding, there is still a lot of money that goes to cross-cutting areas like climate and poverty alleviation, which globally are a little lower in terms of the issue areas being supported. Health and education, largely partly also driven by the Gates Foundation's funding, which Arnav, I'm sure, will talk more about, goes a lot into global health and education. So, and I think these are important things for us to remember as you talk about how does it matter when you're a locally rooted philanthropist? And to answer that question against the backdrop of the statistics, I think the first one, naturally so, is the regulatory and government license to operate. And just given how multiple economies in Asia and globally are becoming a lot more inward looking at domestic strength, and the geopolitics are dictating every country to become stronger inward first before looking outward today. Domestic philanthropies are gaining currency, A, in terms of partnership with government, B, in terms of tackling some of the more quote unquote contentious social issues where they do have greater license and liberty to operate and also work in partnership with government in shaping policies where possible, sometimes influencing and informing policy as well. Second, I think when it looks at marginalized populations where you need to be really embedded closer to communities, whether it's gender, persons with disabilities, or other axes of inequities in the world, again, domestic, locally rooted foundations have stronger local presence where they have been able to build community power, community assets, and that has in turn enabled them to look at more lasting change that is potentially more inclusive. Whereas typically a lot of the other global foundations have worked through domestic partners for the same. And I think that's also led to the growth of collaborations and more partnerships in Asia, which I think is a growing trend. So I'll maybe pause here to give other panelists a chance to come in, but I would say those are some of the key distinguishing trends of locally rooted philanthropies.
Arnav, I'm curious to hear, because Gates Foundation has also been in India for a while. What is your observation? And I know Gates also partners with a lot of domestic philanthropies. And what changes are you observing over the last 10 or 20 years?
Sure. Thanks, Ginny. Thanks to you and Dean Pesek, and to both CSIP and the Lilly School for hosting this insightful panel, and for to be in on a panel with such thoughtful leaders. It's my pleasure. So, I mean, we've been around for almost 25 years, and that's been the lifetime of the foundation. So the foundation started in 2000, and India has been our largest country partnership. We just celebrated, or we are celebrating our 25th year, and we had a major celebration also in India earlier this year. Actually, it was the first time we brought all of our partners together around 400 in one room, to just share and share the joy and the collective impact that all of us have had. I think Indian philanthropy over the last 2 decades, Preetha covered many points. India has a long legacy of giving anyway. But in the last couple of decades, we've started seeing much more strategic, thoughtful, insightful, strategic, collaborative giving. I think we've always had our belief when we started working on partnerships with domestic foundations, or our work from early 2010. Partnering with Indian philanthropies was a key area that we always saw. Because we believe that Indian philanthropies or domestic philanthropies are natural anchors for the work that we all do, which is anchored around human development, social development. And therefore domestic foundations know the local context, they have deep networks. I think foreign foundations can bring in global expertise and knowledge, but I think these are like who India for India solutions or Asia for Asia solutions would come homegrown from the foundation versus from the Western models, and that's something which we've seen that Asia model has really started to emerge, or the India model in some ways. Preetha mentioned about operating foundations. Most of the global foundations actually have been grant making, right? It's in India, which is very interesting how large foundations are actually very much operating in nature. And we partner with a bunch of them. So a couple examples I can give, since you mentioned that Pirimal Foundation is now one of our largest partners on health. We partnering with the Central Square Foundation, which was set up by Ashish and also was our co-founder with CSIP back in 2015-16. We partner with CSF on education. We partner with Reliance on gender, with Nandan Nilekani on DPI. I think just to say, we've seen how the ecosystem has emerged in the last, 10, 15 years, where foundations are actually looking at much more large scale, much more, taking a longer term approach, looking at measurement, looking at sustainability in a much more different way. And we've been, grateful to collaborate with many of them. We've also seen institutional philanthropy, I think more institutional philanthropy than before. We've, examples like Ashoka has created a role model for many others. So Plaksha, Kriyas, And we're also seeing a bunch of centers coming up in different institutions now, whether it's centers of policy, digital health, even stuff like membranes, brain research. It's all happening through Indian philanthropy, which, wasn't that case in 10, 15 years back. So I think that's another shift. And then I think the domestic foundations can take a much more long-term approach. They're here to stay. They know the local context, versus foreign foundations, have a global strategy at many times, though we anchor it in our India work from the Gates Foundation's perspective. But domestic foundations are here to serve and here to stay for the India and the India for the India story in some ways. And we have an India for a global agenda, also an India for India, but the domestic foundations are emerging in that space. We're also taking learnings from India to the global south. So it's quite interesting times in which we are, and it's great that the Indian philanthropy is really, really stepping up in many ways.
I have a quick follow-up to that. So it's an interesting point you make that domestic foundations it's easier for them to have an operating arm, or that's the trend we are observing. Now, for a foundation, there's always a counterpart doing the grassroots work. It's just that in some cases, the grant writing organization has their own grassroots organization. Between working with a third-party NGO and your own operating arm, in terms of just results, are you noticing any difference? My first instinct is that the grant writing or the check writing size, if you have your own operating arm, might be bigger. Does that make a difference? Is that true? And does it make a difference? So in terms of actually getting results and outcomes in the field, does it make a difference when you have your own operating arm versus you're working with NGOs?
Yeah, I mean, so I haven't seen data to put that to action, but what I can say is that I think it comes from a certain belief of running large organizations and the ability to run those large organizations even for social impact is definitely one inspiration for setting up own private operating foundation in some way. I think second, it it's I would say like the foundations have actually hired a lot of people and professionals from many of the grassroots organizations. Like I've met so many people who actually are working with these foundations who had worked in many different grassroots organizations. So I don't think it's an either or. In that case, I think three, also many of the domestic foundations do partner, with the local or the grassroots for nonprofits in many ways. So even that is happening because they believe that certain gaps, or certain expertise can be built. For example, with the Piramal Foundation, we have this tribal health collaborative. So they partnered with Ekjut, who was working on the ground on a specific model to work with the ASHA workers. And so I think, in partnership with Reliance, we're actually co-funding a bunch of grassroots organizations in different states, in Pradhan, in Madhya Pradesh, with Gram Vikas in Odisha, with BIF in Gujarat. So I don't think it's an either or in that sense. I think there are areas of convergence, and there are people who, end of the day, it all comes to people in some ways for all of the work that we do, and the people work in both these organizations in some ways. So I wouldn't say it's an either or to say what you need to get to impact, as in having that grassroots connect, having the connect to the government, working closely with both of them. I think something which is important, and I think both of them in different ways are learning and doing that in many ways, and we continue to learn and operate on that also, for ourselves.
Yeah, makes sense. It's just another way of having an operating model. I'm going back to something Pritha said a bit earlier. One thing that I think everybody understands is that private philanthropy it makes up a very small percentage of spending. Governments everywhere are still the biggest spenders. And one way of looking at private philanthropy is that its best use is as a risk capital for change or experimentation or innovation. But in practice, the application of private philanthropy itself is very fragmented and the outcomes are distributed. Starting with Dylan, if you had to pick one area today, health, skilling, climate, or what have you, that most urgently you think needs this kind of capital, which is risk capital, what do you think it would be? Why? And why do you think it's not happening?
Okay, before I answer your question directly, I would add up a bit on the Arnav's just stated. Actually, I'll take Hong Kong Jockey Club Charity Trust as example. We've been operating as a ground maker for 100 years. But in most recent years, we started to initiate this so-called TIP, Trust Initiated Program. Basically, we're transforming us partially a operating NGO kind of arm. So we are reaching out. We do not want ourselves to stay as a grant maker, traditional grant maker. We just give away the money to the local NGOs that know who believes they know the best of the local the groundwork. But after 100 years operating in Hong Kong, the small islands and around, we believe that we do have some understanding of the society, the pain point, and we do want to be more active. So we have this TIP. I think I saw this as a trend of those long operating foundation, especially that locally operated, and then they start to grow this expertise as well as understanding of local market or say society, and then it decide to move out. I think that's a healthy move. That's also a way of empowering the local NGOs. See that we take those TIPs as a pilot program, then it's a showcase of what we would see philanthropy or say charity would look like. And through those TIP, we can better evaluate the impact. It's not just outcome, but impact measurement to try something that we actually want those money well spent. So that's just one add-on to the previous discussion. Okay, back to the question that I would introduce a little bit more of my organization, which is IOP. Bridgesman knows better than us. We are actually Hong Kong Jockey Club Charity Trust as well as the club is our founding donors. It's a 6.8 billion grant donation, strategic donation to set up this IOP Institute Philanthropy, trying to really unlock the potential of Asia philanthropy. So we are set as a think, fund, do tank. Think we're trying to do some research in some thought leadership in philanthropy in itself. And one flagship program is we call it the Commission on Asia Philanthropy. So we are gathering a bunch of leading foundations across Asia, as Hong Kong Jockey Club as well as Nippon Foundation as the co-convener. We also have Songxinling Foundation, Tencent from mainland China, Tata from India, Temasek, Kinkaid, etc., etc. Those leading foundations, Yayasan, Tononton. We're trying to really think what's Asia ways of giving is about, what success will look like, say in 2050. And then we're trying to see what the gap is about, right? Where's the gap and how we as leading foundations in different countries across Asia would try to close the gap together with the partners, the stakeholders in each of the different countries. We are about to have like 3 years of collaboration, research, and trying to come up with I won't say a solution, but some guiding principle that each of us should play to really unlock the potential of Asia ways of giving. That the thinking part. I'll come back to the fun, but we also do convening. We're trying to bring together the great minds, because in Asia and for Asia, because one of the pain points that we are facing is in some of this area in Asia that the local NGOs are not. Well, I would say maybe it's in a different stage of development, but not as mature as those in, say, United States as well as Europe. So even if we would want to get things done in some of the area with the money, it doesn't work out the way that we would wish for. It's a sector that is not mature enough. So we were trying to build a platform for everyone to communicate, to really talk about what we've been struggle about and what's a pain point is about, and trying to do some of the capacity building locally and regionally. So that's the do part. So back to the funding part. Different from our mother, the donor, which has billions of donations annually in Hong Kong itself. We have a much smaller fund, but we have a wider geographic coverage. So the way we choose where we fund, because we find philanthropic capital could be best use of the area that first, it's not commercially stand, so the private capital would be not have no interest in it. But it's so important that we should work on it. Yet it's so risky that government might not have the risk appetite to take on it, or say they are not covering it yet, or hesitate. So those are the area that we believe that the philanthropic capital should work the best out of it. So we found those catalytic project. We try to make it stand either commercially or it's, I would say, socially stand, and then either the government would decide to take it into their annual budget, or some of the private capital would willing to invest it to really boost it. I would take one of the example. One area that we're particularly interested in the health impact of climate change. Everybody talk about climate change. Everybody talk about mitigation, as well as recently we turned into adaptation. And everybody said, oh, okay, yes, we can talk about the climate change would have some impact on human health, either through some of those, in habitation, or say the pandemic, etc., etc. But nobody can actually really clearly state, okay, what's the impact is about. So one of those program that we donated, we supported together with Rockefeller Foundation is really to scoping what it's about, what's climate change impact on health is about, what's are the severes of each impact on what kind of health issue that we should really address. So that's a research part.
Right.
Yet after which we might have our, it's still curating. So we will have our second phase, which is, okay, once we decide there is an area that we could probably work on, we will need to fund some local adaptation program to say there is if the theory is okay, if every 1 degree centigrade like a raise of the climate, and there was a some percentage of certain diseases were happening to some specific age group, which will lead to equivalent to some social expenditures. So if our intervene initiatives, say adaptation initiatives, locally designed, there is a cost. If that cost is smaller than those social capital that we would spend on those incremental diseases that are caused by climate change, then it's a standing and successful program. Then we can sell it to the government. Instead of spending those money to those later on cure, medication, etc., etc., you should spend it on the early intervention. That's the case. Right. Maybe we could even sell it to the private sector, say health insurance, etc., etc. Then our pie has grown, and I think that's where we would work on it.
Yeah.
Sorry if
I agree. No, I totally agree. R&D discovery is a great example of, deploying philanthropy as risk capital. Research is a great example. But clearly, moving on to Arnav and Prithvi, if either of you want to take this, there's not enough of that mindset that we should use private philanthropy as risk capital. It's a mix of mostly grassroots, providing service needs. It's tangible. There's at least some hope of measuring. Whereas what Dylan is talking about, it's a little bit of you're discovering and you don't know what's going to come out of it. So what has to change for this mindset to change? Like, is it really about not being able to measure? Does regulatory constraints come into the mix? Like what will it take for this mindset to change?
I mean, I'm happy to step in, which, in some ways, Jenny, this discussion links to your previous question, which I would 100% agree with Arnav. I don't think there's data to show whether particularly a grant making or operating is more results oriented or has evidence of greater impact. That said, two things. One, majority of the operating foundations, like you're insinuating, operate in service delivery, right? And historically, this has come about because many of these foundations have large teams on the ground because they were manufacturing organizations or organizations like financial services, which had branches on the ground, and they're leveraging some of that human capital plus hiring additional manpower to support their giving. And hence they look at results like they look at it in business in terms of outputs like reach, number of people touched, number of services provided or trainings done, etc. And in fact, our work on Asian philanthropy shows that there's very little investment in measuring, evaluation, and reporting beyond outputs compared to global foundations where the percentage of reporting on outcomes, and here I'm not making a value judgment about whether that reporting is correct or accurate, not on that methodology, but just surely looking at outcomes and impact that Arnav was alluding to is much more in the global arena than Asian. And if you look at why, I think, it is complex. And partly, I think, because philanthropy is still evolving in this region, and working with government is still very much about partnering with government systems at the ground level, whether it's at the subnational level or at the central government level. But really trying to look at philanthropy, like you're saying, as gap filling, whether it's for research, policy influence, shifting systems, or encouraging other actors, what might be called field building or ecosystem building, is still very new in Asia. Because most often from a risk spectrum, the evolution of philanthropy has been looking at risk from a service delivery perspective, where government does not reach certain populations. How does philanthropy come in to plug that gap? So I wouldn't even call it the tail of the dog. It's actually the tip of the tail of the dog, just in terms of the quantum of resources that this tiny bit of philanthropy is trying to influence. But of course, I think now, especially in India and some countries in Asia, I think there's a realization that if you're working at the systemic level, you could still be the tip of the tail, but you're actually more at the forefront of influencing both government capital, but also, as Dylan was alluding, in some cases, blended other private sources of capital. But I would really put a spotlight again on saying that it shouldn't be that philanthropy, whether you decide to do health or cross-cutting issues like poverty alleviation, it's so important to be grounded in the communities you work with because, at Britspan, we now have data to show that if you look only at programmatic impact, it's not going to last you beyond the philanthropic support. But if you're actually building the strength of the communities, local leadership, even after philanthropy steps out, if it's supported by government budgets, the community is more likely to be strengthened and take it up for the longer term. So I would put a real pin on saying that, to your question of which issues are important for risk capital, it should be defined by this mix of market gap, government leverage, but very importantly, building the community strength. Because otherwise, this capital, once it leaves, the results will leave in its wake.
For sure, that is a risk. Dean Pisik, I don't know if you had any follow-up. I wanted to make sure we leave the door open for you to come in.
Well, thank you. I think I'm learning a lot, and I think it's fascinating to see some of the similar language about impact and catalysts coming to the fore. And I think that is a very useful kind of language because it speaks the language of technocracy and how getting things done and results. And that's a way to prove the value of philanthropy in situations where its legitimacy might not be fully established. But I also would love to, pull back a little bit. We have professors at the school who rightfully always encourage us to understand that philanthropy is not something that is only confined to the West, to images of the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, and that it is not only exercised through institutional philanthropy, although that is in many ways the tip of the spear as well. I think there are deep philanthropic traditions through family, through faith, that are sources of potential strength across Asia as well. And that's also a question of pragmatism as well, because we live in volatile times when kind of populist responses can divert the best laid plans of philanthropy and that lead to regulatory or government changes. So I think my overall question, as I'm learning so much about the innovations and the interesting um, uh, uh, the interesting organizational innovations that are taking place is, what is being done, what can be done to better educate the broader population, engage the broader population, the communities, to understand the possibilities of their own actions and their own philanthropies. We at the school often, and remind people that philanthropy is inherent in everybody's life course, and the possibility to volunteer and give has built our societies through at the community level, not only at the level of the billionaires as well. So the question, I think, is, what can be done, what should be done to help educate government officials and include communities to better understand what this sector that we think can be catalytic and transformational and bring really interesting talent to the social sector. What is being done to help in that educational dissemination, broader engagement space, so that, to Priya's point, once the money from the institutional donors moves away, it doesn't dissipate. What is being done to better integrate the philanthropic possibilities of social innovation, both in the public space and in the broader community cultural space?
I'm just noticing that we've actually spent a lot of good time, and a good conversation is a good one when time goes by very quickly. There is a question I want to make sure we answer. It came from the registrations, and I think came up in the chat as well. This I think goes to the heart of many of the people who are in attendance today. Pritham, can I start with you? So there's a bit of a near-term trend that's developing. India is starting to be perceived as a middle-income country. So there is a thought process that India and maybe other Asian countries have plenty of wealth of their own, and they don't need to go outside for foreign funding. But the fact is, local philanthropy hasn't grown enough. There is still a bit of a gap. And Western philanthropy is receding very rapidly. So it is leaving a bit of a sudden kind of a hole. And the question that has come from the audience is, how should NGOs think about foreign funding today? Like, what can they do in the near term? Because all this is happening very rapidly. Should they diversify funding sources to other parts of the West? Should they double down on domestic philanthropy? How might they think about this?
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. And very quickly to go to Amir, your question, and it's a very complex one, but I did want to touch upon it. But I think it is a very difficult issue. The point you made on education, awareness, dissemination, both at the societal fabric level, but also government overall. And I think, in a nutshell, it does require a lot of normative change, behavior change, as well as making public systems and policies more inclusive. So I would say that, the point you're raising is going to be a multi-year journey for most societies in Asia to put a spotlight both on what we call everyday retail giving and also the large-scale philanthropic foundation or corporate foundation giving. And communities, I think, are realizing that value, but unless there's deep investment in building local community leadership, integrating government capital and private capital with philanthropic funding, I think the awareness element is going to still be quite elusive. So there is a lot of work going on in that space, particularly in India today, and happy to discuss more. To your question, Jenny, we get asked this every day, and more so after the USAID funding rollout. And I wish I had a pot of gold or a briefcase of gold as an answer, but sadly, I think it is indeed difficult times. I don't want to mince words when I say that I think nonprofits in India, in Asia, globally are probably going through a moment of reckoning. And we as Britspan are a global nonprofit. It's true for us as a large global nonprofit as much as for any marginalized NGO. So I do think it's time to look at it positively. I'm eternally an optimist. So I think it is an opportunity to rethink, reimagine our equitable worlds today. And that includes funding, because if you look at a tripod of social change, it includes capital, it includes talent, and it includes good strategy or design. And while strategy and talent might still be building up, capital is truly at risk today. So how do we really reimagine it? And I think three things that we constantly talk to our nonprofit partners about. First, look at it as a partnership or much more in collaboration. I think even Amir, when you spoke about the GPI results, the first trend I was struck to see was collaboration. Across the world, as you have done the survey, there's been such a massive increase in partnerships and collaborations. And that's the exact same thing that the Britspan research has shown in Asia and Africa, both South and Southeast Asia, as well as in the United States, that there's a massive jump in multi-stakeholder partnerships or collaborations. So can nonprofits reimagine the way they deliver work, not just as attracting capital to their organizations, but actually to the cause? So for example, in India, there's the Dasra Adolescent Collaborative that puts a spotlight on the 10 to 19 adolescent issues. And the money that the collaborative attracted was a minuscule portion of the capital that came to the field of adolescents' well-being. And that to me is a true case in point that you're helping a cause. You don't necessarily need to grow in size as a nonprofit yourself. And that's just one model. The second one could be that of diaspora. I think there's much more awareness about diaspora giving now into India. Africa has got massive amounts of diaspora giving back into the subcontinent, but still very underleveraged compared to foreign global philanthropy. So how can we really look at creative ways to unleash more diaspora giving? And that could be from multiple pockets of high net worth philanthropy. So I would say that could be the second opportunity. The third one would be definitely not to ignore the domestic philanthropists in your country. And there I would say it's a long-term journey. It's not a sprint, but a marathon. Because even India at the 10th anniversary of CSR, which we celebrated last year, has shown a massive shift. When we did a survey at Britspan a few years ago, majority of corporates said they give to tick the compliance box because CSR is law. But few years down, when we surveyed nonprofits through interviews, majority of them are actually looking at impact, whichever way they define it. So there is a shift, but it's taken 8 years, 10 years. So I think there is hope here, and one needs to not feel disillusioned, but actually work deeply with domestic philanthropists, whether they're corporate, state-linked, or private foundations, to build that bridge of trust, because that is going to pay off in the long term. And I know many nonprofits in India, in Singapore, in Asia that have started that journey. So I would say those are the top three kind of trends to counteract some of the falls in global funding or USAID support.
I was talking to one of my colleagues who commented that while as difficult as this moment is, it is going to force a round of innovative thinking that we will not see until maybe 10 years from now. 10 years from now, we'll look back to this moment and say this moment created, and much like the pandemic, it created a new form of a new kind of collaborative, new solutions, which now we can look back and say it was a good thing. So you're right, it is a very difficult moment for everybody to be, but on that optimistic note that something will come out of this, some new creative way of working together will come out of this. I noticed that we have about 5 minutes left before we go into the breakout session. And I think it probably is not possible now to take questions from the audience, but what we will do is we'll package the questions that came up today in the chat and send it to the panelists. And so you have the opportunity to address it. And I'm going to do a quick round of thanks, but before that, if we can do just a quick round, Pritha, Arnav, Dylan, and also Dean Pesek, in just a few words, when you think about the challenges and where philanthropy could be going, what is the opportunity that you are seeing, that you are betting on, that you are most passionate and excited about?
All right, I'll go first. I would say, especially in a time of geographic tension and words getting crazy, I think philanthropy would be a way of strengthen the collaboration. I think it would be still, I would say it will be a stronger tie in between the people who believe in the good of humanity. We need to believe in that. and also for those like trustees or foundations, we should really take on those high risky thing because we are the only source of force that might, for the good of humanity. I encourage every one of us to work together, to stand together stronger, to take bigger risk for the betterment of the society.
Yeah, I would
Thank you,
just
Dylan.
build on that and say I mean, I see like the next decade, and I'm very bullish about how homegrown philanthropy, both in India and in Asia, will really come to fore. And you're already seeing multiple examples of that, whether it's the R&D space where you're seeing centers for brain research, set up by Chris Gopalakrishnan, or Center for Membrane set up by Mirik Gogri. These were unheard of things before. Or second, the kinds of collaboration which are happening. Looking at the Philanthropic Asia Alliance in Singapore with Temasek, of which even Hong Kong Jockey Club is a part of, and which is looking at broader Asia. And I think three, the kind of community-driven models that you're already also seeing coming up. So I feel like at all levels, in some ways, you are seeing a different flavor, but very much homegrown, very much led by Asians, by Indians in that sense. To over the next decade. I think, yeah, so I didn't goes back to just saying like how bullish we are on that, and that's the reason why we continue to believe, from our perspective, to work closely with these philanthropists over the next decade, because we're going to be here for now 20 more years and not going to be beyond that. I think it's been publicly stated. But you'll need philanthropy, as Dylan was saying, for longer and for generations. So one big part of us is to how can we continue from a sustainability perspective to have grow that entire ecosystem and legacy.
Yeah, I think for me, two things. One, the growth in partnerships, because I think COVID really showed that no single organization can tackle something at scale. And Asia saw a 45% jump in giving around COVID. So how do you continue that momentum, in terms of domestic, large scale, ambitious giving for scale change? And the second thing that gives me hope and optimism is the fact that more are thinking about this systemically and cross-cutting because I mean, I often say this, when we think of our own children's development, we don't just say we want to give them great education and not worry about their health, water, sanitation. So we should not be looking at poverty alleviation differently. So you do need to look at it holistically. And I think more people through partnerships or directly through having a cross-cutting, multidimensional agenda is very hopeful for the world.
Well, what gives me hope, Ginny, is the talent that comes to this sector, the people that you have assembled here today. Because at the end of the day, a philanthropy is a space apart, a space where we gather to see, what alternative ways of imagining are being together in society and community can take place, and that requires a lot of curiosity, persistence, and intelligence. And historically, everywhere, philanthropy has always been the source of catalysm of catalysts who have imagined and carried through alternative ways of improving a society around us. So I think the possibility of philanthropy and the talent that we see around us pushing it forward is what gives me hope, and I look forward to seeing what it brings to fruition.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and sharing your time so generously. My team is encouraging me to wrap it up, but we'll be sure to pass on the questions to you. And I truly believe this was a big topic. It's difficult to cover much of it in an hour, but hopefully we will think of this as the start of a conversation to be continued. Thank you so much, Dean Pasek, Pritha, Dylan, and Arnav. I hope you can stay on for a couple of one of the breakout sessions, but thank you for being here. Rekha, I think I hand it over to you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all the panelists. Now we will be moving to our breakout sessions. Every audience who have registered for the breakout session will automatically move in. I once again thank you, Pratha, Dean Pacific, Arnav, Ginny, and Dylan for your insightful thoughts. Kajal, can we just move to the sessions?
School, check if they work, and constantly do a design thinking process right there and then. So there are a lot of these ideas that have come from the ground, from the school. If you don't mind, I can share a couple of them. One is, there's So kids in grade 1 struggle to read in like English, right? So the teachers have actually created this app that creates stories where the child is the hero of the story, and it's a personalized auto-generated story that any child can create for themselves. And so the motivation to read suddenly just shoots up. There are historical boards, so we created kind of historical Gandhiji, historical kind of like Albert Einstein, and we are checking to see how students' questioning skills are getting better when they interact with these bots. We have an AI like teacher coach. So the coach records the class, the teacher's voice, analyzes the transcript of the class, and gives actionable feedback in 10 minutes to the teacher on what she did well or what she can kind of work on. So there are all of these are apps that have come from the ground for us, and they are making our lives easier. They're not replacing the teacher, but they're making the teacher's lives easier.
Thank you, Karishma, and I think great insights there from really mapping the process of learning, which is so critical. And the fact that you're improvising on the go and getting feedback from the classrooms on the go as you improvise your AI tools. But I love the bit of, and I think this is a big takeaway for the audience, right? Technology doesn't need to replace in the context of education, replace the teacher. It's making the teacher's life easier, and I think that's very important for all of us to really keep in mind. Thank you for those insights. Aziz, moving to you. The scale at which rocket learning has grown is nothing short of remarkable. You've also recently partnered with Google to develop an AI tool that focuses on school readiness for children, in the age group of 3 to 6. Now, given India's diverse cultural landscape, I mean, you are advising the central government, you are also working with a specific state. How do you really manage to balance between, bringing in globally informed practices, achieving scale, and also, not losing sight of the contextual nuances?
Yeah, thanks, Aditi, for the question. And this is something that we think very deeply about, in some sense, especially AI coming in is causing organizations and systems to even disrupt what they were doing on technology alone. And technology, in any case, was disrupting what was happening, in terms of brick and mortar. I do think eventually, though, the value of technology in the impact space is going to be educators using technology thoughtfully rather than sort of technologists coming in and sort of trying to adopt the hammer to the nail, as Karishma mentioned, right? So I think there are two uses that we envisage. One is deepening impact. The second is sort of being able to scale it more. I think deepening, Karishma has covered wonderfully in terms of the examples that she cited. So we're also trying to, for example, use this to give Anganwadi educators who are India's public system of workers, a day-by-day plan for what they can do. All right. So take out some of the cognitive load of having to plan every day separately. All right. And be able to spend that time on actually engaging with the kids. Or for example, looking back at the data of children, they have a lot of data. Nobody ever looks at that data. Expecting one person to look at 50 data points of 30 kids on a daily basis is nothing short of impossible. And so can we actually come back and say, look, this is to do this lesson with this child, you can do it in this way, right? So there's for children with disabilities, there are such fantastic use cases. So for the birth to 6-year-olds, there's a lot of deepening possible. But if you talk about scaling, then I think what is really interesting is that this is enabling us to reach many more people because the possibility of contextualizing, localizing, translating, right? And we are, I wouldn't say that we are there where AI can do this wonderfully for every language, for every local dialect yet. But I think it's in a place where we're getting there, right? Even 6 months ago, the models are much better now than they used to be 6 months ago. So, I'll give an example. The Meghalaya government was very keen to work with us. And they said that you please come, from the senior most levels, we got this request. And normally, we are the ones convincing governments to do something, and here the government was coming. But what we said was Meghalaya has 2 languages, Garo and Khasi, and there are 5,000 Anganwadis, right? And if I focus on Hindi content, then I can reach 500,000 daycare centers or schools. So I think from a very the heart was saying that, look, we should go to Meghalaya. The brain was saying that it's not possible, right? And and I think so. At that point, 2 years ago, we didn't end up going. And now what we're saying is that actually through translations and scripting and putting on, that is actually possible that we can start working in Meghalaya, we can start working in Tripura, we can start working in and I think in the future, it's possible that even in India, every 25 kilometers, apparently dialect changes, right? So can we like actually start using local dialects? Then contextualization, right? Out of, say, we use a lot of audio-visual content. We know that out of 100 videos, about 60 don't need any may not need any contextualization, but 40 do. Now, actually, AI can pick up and say that, look, I'll replace the food items with this food item and so on, right? And make it really contextual. So I think the scale is also something that can really be impactful. And of course, depth can be there. We do need to be careful that there are humans in the loop there, and data security and privacy is there. Right now, things are not perfect, right? And obviously, AI models or technology models come in with their own biases, etc. And especially for people working with young kids or even with sort of vulnerable populations, right? I think it is even more important that we don't like perpetuate stereotypes. So I think from that perspective, for example, AI can, so data security, privacy is one thing, but even the tone and behavior, right? Like AI can be a strict tutor and can name and shame children or say that you don't even know anything, right? Or it would have a personality that is encouraging, motivating. So we spend a lot of effort in trying to see how do you make it an encouraging, motivating, best in class, sort of either, guide, either a sort of coach or partner for the teacher or like a guide for kids, right? So I think those are a few of the things, but we have to be thoughtful about how we sort of integrate, and I'll come later to the limitations, right? I think I think we'll cover that later, but there's definitely over the last 2 years there's been a lot of progress and a lot of excitement about what can happen.
That's interesting, Aziz. I think a lot of people are going to reach out to you on how do you get government to call you instead of you going and making the ask first. So that's lovely to hear. But yeah, I think again lots of takeaways here in terms of using technology thoughtfully. And whether it is, like you said, whether it is just something as simple as figuring out the language that you want to start with, or your example of 100 videos, of which there would be 60 that don't need contextualization, and maybe focusing on those 60 before you move to the next 40, or using the best tools available today to contextualize those 40. So that was extremely helpful. Thank you. Rajiv, since Aziz has touched upon data integrity, you've worked across startups and social ventures. How do the ethics and expectations around technology differ in these spaces? And what can philanthropists learn from this distinction?
So, Aditi, thanks first of all for having me here. So, apart from being involved with grassroots NGOs, I also have another role of being a VC, investing in deep tech companies. So the star can't be, more contrasting. The difference can't be more contrasting. When we go to the NPOs, apart from that, they want to protect the donors' data. Really, what we find is that there is a certain amount of suspicion about introduction of technology in wanting to really protect their beneficiaries. Now, what happens is our technical, logical mind say, but these concerns are unfounded, and probably they are. But actually, it becomes a very large cultural gap out there. So working with them, building the trust, or working with people who have that trust and who understand becomes very, very important. The second thing is because they don't understand what these at times ethics could be, they don't know what questions to ask. I think responsibility shifts very starkly to the provider. They have to make sure whatever they are going with right security, right protection of data in place, where it does not get misused, because they may trust you, and once they trust you, they will give you full access, and they would not know what questions to ask. And there, we need to exhibit that sense of responsibility. So that has been our learning when it comes to, the whole thing about ethics and protection of data.
Thank you, Rajiv. And I think very good insights there. And I'm sure a lot of the philanthropists here are taking that away, which is even guiding our NPO partners on these aspects. And like you said, which questions to ask. Right. So thank you for that. Aziz, I'll come back to you first since you touched upon challenges. Tell us a little more about about what are really on-ground realities in terms of access or in terms of just openness to technology, Aziz.
Yeah, I think there are. I think overall, I would say the picture is good, and I think in the last 5 to 7 years, we have seen a digital revolution in terms of ownership of either hardware, right, like mobile phones, or software like data packs, right. So those things have become cheaper, and to the extent that today, from what we see, right, 80% plus of households, even in rural India, families whose kids are going to government schools, have a smartphone, right, with WhatsApp. That number was about 30% 5 years ago, right? So the number has jumped massively, to the extent that's nearly there in terms of educators or say frontline workers, nurses, etc. Anybody basically who has a 10,000 rupees or above job, they have a smartphone with WhatsApp, right? So that penetration has become quite deep. In fact, we've seen over the last 3 years in Haryana, for example, which is one of the states where we work, or in Maharashtra, 60 to 70% of households actually have two smartphones. So there was earlier the issue was that if there's only one, then say the father or the husband would be having access, so it was hard to reach sort of the end person who may have needed the thing. But that has also been changing, so that's very interesting. That said, we do see that digital literacy is still an issue, right? And while at the macro is supporting that transition, and the macro is sort of improving it on its own, but in the next 5 years, it will continue to be something that has to be accounted for in any of the work we do, right? And so, for example, in our model, we actually have a lot of offline sort of interactions to help build digital literacy of educators. In fact, the one thing we see consistent, if we try to track like teachers who are benefiting from our program and correspondingly students, versus factors like income, versus factors like age, a lot of other stuff, right? Like who is really sort of engaging or benefiting. The big factor is digital literacy, right? So I think that is something that's really on NPOs and funders and others to sort of see, and at least to have an account, right? And maybe 5 years later, that problem will go away. The other thing that will not necessarily go away is engaging, right? Why should people engage or use like a social impact intervention? Right? Now that problem has been there forever, right? Like often these are hard interventions to do. They require you to take time out from your day. The impact may be visible much later, sort of, all of that, right? So I think that becomes a big question, that you can, for those people who engage, like, and that's been the issue with edtech, health tech, all of that, right? If you engage, then there will be impact on you. But how many people are actually engaging? And so that is the question, right? And so AI or other fancy things don't necessarily improve engagement, right? They will improve impact on those engaging, right? And so that's the question: how do we sort of get people to build habits, to sign up to these sorts of interventions that are digital enabled? How do you get them to have the habit of not just signing up once, but doing it on a day-to-day basis, especially for problems like education or preventative healthcare or other things where you need to actually maintain behaviors over long periods of time, right? As opposed to, say, a polio vaccination, which you can do in a one-shot sort of way, right? I mean, obviously that requires high behavior change as well, but this is at a different level altogether. So I think that is the other sort of challenge that you have, right? That eventually you could be solved by apps and information and content in every sort of language. How do you provide that in a easily understandable way for people and get them in the habit? And so all our work actually has been on that. For example, we use WhatsApp and not a new app, right? Because we say people are used to WhatsApp, they're anyway checking it every day, we'll get information. We go through a government system so that it doesn't seem like some different NGOs coming in, right? It seems like it's sort of the curriculum from the system that has gone. In fact, our staff introduces themselves as government employees or government workers with the permission of the government, of course. We create these peer communities which have been known to work offline, but we make them digital, right? So anyway, that's a little bit of sort of some of the techniques we have adopted. But if you see, most of these techniques are like very strong offline techniques which have become digital enabled so that people start using digital tools in an effective way, right? And if you lose sight of that and just focus on the next shiny like AI bot, right, and say that, oh, we've made this amazing app, everybody in the country should download, that's going to be hard, right? During COVID times, I think the most downloaded government app is probably the COVID app, which the whole government got after, right? Saying everybody download this. I think that had somewhere about 13 or 14 crore downloads. right? So that was the limit we hit at that point. Now, maybe in today's day and age, we would have hit 20 crore or something, right? But WhatsApp and YouTube is already at 60, 70 crores or going more. But even that is not everywhere, right? So I think that is the question. How do we sort of ensure access and engagement and meet users where they are and how they can use this and help them build habits, right? So long answer, but those are my views. Yeah.
No, I think that is very helpful, Aziz. What I'm taking away is one is a hybrid model at this point where, it can't be just technology. But yeah, I think building habits and getting people used to it is the critical piece. I'm taking the liberty of quoting Aparna Hegde from Arman over here because she calls her model tech plus touch. And I think that's exactly what you're saying, right? It's just so critical. Thank you for that. Rajiv, coming back to you, when you launched Dhwani Foundation, you took a conscious decision early on to focus on organizational development and really help nonprofits get tech ready. How was that experience? And second part of my question is, how are you viewing the evolution from, low tech or even from a journey of getting people used to Excel and basic MIS on Excel to more sophisticated tools today?
So, Aditi, you're right. So when we started about 15 years back, coming from Bangalore with tech background, we thought the best thing we can do is introduce the tech to NGOs because we saw that big gap and they needed it. After doing all that for a few years, we realized that adoption was very, very poor. And during one of those interactions with one of the leaders, trying to understand why he's not using it, he really says very exasperatedly, you only talk tech. We have other problems too. And then we realized that we cannot take this in isolation. And that's where we started the whole organizational development program. Organization has to have a certain level of maturity before they can start adopting the tech. Now, we came up then through a whole journey. We have like 175 points, which we believe organization needs to implement for organization development, of which really tech is less than 20. So you can see how much more work needs to be done before they can even think of using tech or can derive value from tech. They may take it from you because you are giving it to them, but can they really derive any value out of it? Now, what that has seen is that from about 30 odd NGOs, which we were 7-8 years back, today we have more than 400 NGOs, and these are really grassroots NGOs which are using it. Mm-hmm. So, I'm right now actually in Odisha visiting some of the NGOs and, been going to some of the really, really areas I had never even heard of. And I'm sure some of the areas even people in Odisha had not heard of. And they have no tech. And like Aziz mentioned, the only thing constant is smartphone and WhatsApp. And interestingly, with younger crowd, Instagram. I remember in one of the NGO, the team we were meeting, as soon as we said that you will have to make reels to promote your NGOs, suddenly there were two girls and their face lit up. Says, yeah, this we understand. Wow. So it's quite interesting that how some of the tech has pervaded. So one of the biggest learning we had that tech is, any technology is not just introduction of tech, but it's a change management process. And it has to be taken as a change management. You have to work with them before introducing tech. You, of course, have to work with them while introducing, and you have to do some amount of handholding after introducing technology. And that is when the tech gets adopted and internalized and used in day-to-day basis. It takes time, it takes a lot of patience, it takes a lot of effort. But today we are seeing after working on this for 8 years, it's really beginning to pay off. When you see some of these very, very grassroots NGOs, getting onto it and behaving a lot more professionally, including in use of their tech.
That's wonderful, and I hope everyone in the audience has picked this up of Rajiv's experience of the last 8 years, because I think each one of us on either side of the table has had our moments of struggling with how do you really deepen this, how do you get organizations be it our own organizations that we are working in or our partner organizations tech ready. And this insight's very, very encouraging, Rajiv. Karishma, coming back to you, Rajiv and Aziz have worked in an environment, very small scale, non-profits. Aziz is working with, an environment where they're directly working with a range of beneficiaries across the country. At Shikha, your teachers are, used to an urban culture, would be a little more comfortable with technology versus, Rajiv and Aziz's audience. But I'm sure there was some amount of mindset shifts that you had to work on as well. Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, this is not I don't think it's an urban-rural issue. It's more, like you said, a mindset challenge. There's a lot of research on teacher mindsets for technology. How do you change certain mindsets to be able to kind of adapt better? But some stuff that we have discovered through our experiences, right? So first is that have a strong philosophy that AI is not your competition, AI or technology. They should be your best friend. They are partners with you, so that is the first big mindset shift that has to happen. They don't feel like it's taking over my job. I think that's something we've seen throughout kind of history, like history of technology, that every time there's some big wave of tech, it's like, oh, the jobs are going to go, right? But the jobs are going to go. They're going to be changed. They're going to transfer. You have to relearn, upskill to be able to kind of adapt to that. The second thing is, the culture of the school or the institute. Decrease the stakes for failure when you're using technology. If you feel like, okay, if I touch this button and something breaks and I'm going to get punished for it, right? You are setting the wrong culture in their organization. I want my teachers to take risks. I want them to break things. I want them to try things out and not be punished for it, but in fact be kind of rewarded for it. So the school culture has to be very nicely tweaked to create that kind of innovation. And it's not just tech, it's any kind of like innovation or new ideas needs that kind of a culture. So it has to be constantly drilled in again and again. The teacher roles, right? Like we are used to the teacher being the center of the class, having all the power. The students are the ones who are the beneficiaries and the kind of, receivers. With technology, this changes. My students are way more tech savvy than my teachers are already. Right. So the teachers have to be okay with that. They have to say, okay, fine, let's co-learn. Let's learn together. I'm not the fount of all kind of wisdom here. I want to learn with you. Very often we have our own students coming and teaching our teachers how to change the speed on kind of YouTube videos or to start captions, or the students come in front of the class and show the teacher how that happens. And the teachers are accepting of that. So have a kind of open mind that your power center is not just you, it's also the entire class, and it's a learning space. I would say show evidence, right? Show evidence of what it can do in their own settings. Don't just have a large presentation, a generic, teacher development presentation says, oh, listen, guys, this is going to be it. You have to use this, etc. You have to show them what it means for them in their own setting. Ideally, let teachers talk to teachers. Let the same beneficiaries talk to each other and convince each other. One person standing at the front and a tech person especially standing at the front and saying that you should use this. That really has not worked for us. There's also a sense of identity here, like, oh, I'm not a tech person. We hear this all the time that I'm a teacher, I know my subject, but I'm not a tech person. I struggle with it. Slap it down. Every time someone says this, that is not a thing. You cannot say that I'm not a tech person and be proud of it. In fact, you should make it very cool. Be a tech person and say, of course, I'm at the cutting edge. I know what you're talking about. I can recognize when someone is, giving me some tech product that is completely useless. I can screen that and know what that sort of, looks like. And the last thing that I would say is, let them create technology, not just consume it. So we have in our school, we created this AI sandbox. So it's like a little platform where teachers can create their own apps. They just have to put in a prompt and it generates out an app. So imagine a teacher in a class 2 classroom. Oh, I have this problem in my class. I'll just make an app for it. Right. So that is really empowering the beneficiary and not just, and so they understand that it's not some kind of rocket science. It's not something that is so nebulous. It's something that I can do myself. I have the power to do it. I would say learn from the for-profit world. One very important thing that we sort of keep making a mistake in our work is that our design, our UI UX is not so great. We feel like, oh, it's for a poor person, it's for a poor beneficiary. They don't really understand. Why should we not give them the same respect as a for-profit would give to their customer? right? Make the UI UX beautiful, make it look nice, design it well, market it well, market it, learn from the for-profit world. Don't think of that as a bad, like as a bad world. They're giving us really good examples of how we can market tech better. So, I mean, there are lots of examples of, like, tech that have been created by the government or by various smaller kind of NGOs. It just looks so bad and it's so clunky. It's so difficult to use. Don't disrespect your beneficiary. Yeah, that's, I would say these are the ways to sort of change their mindsets.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Karishma. And I think, like you say, and this is true for technology or anything else, you have to experiment with things before you become a master at it. So that's very interesting insight. I'm not going to wait for the Q&A side. There's a very contextual point in the audience. While some of these examples from Aziz and Karishma are obviously their experiences in the education space, I think this is applicable to every sector. Right, we have to get our beneficiaries into the or even our own colleagues, etc., into the habit of being comfortable with technology, experimenting with technology, making those mistakes. But I will come back to you, Rajiv. Any use case examples from non-education domains that you would want to share?
I think you're limited by imagination. And I can tell you from top of my mind, and also because of the my recent visits, agriculture can be such a huge area where AI can be used. Any kind of survey, any kind of feedback in disaster management, for example, can this be an area where we can use? So I can think of so many places. I mean, I'm not even talking about health, where it is so obvious that how we can bring the healthcare, the preventive healthcare to grassroots by using the technology. So I think we're limited by our imagination. Some of the things, because like I said, I'm also on the other side, which I see. And I'm waiting, like Aziz mentioned, I'm just waiting for some of this AI to mature, because it has to be done in vernacular and it has to be done very effectively. And it has to be voice-based. It can't be text-based.
True.
And then, what can be done with it is just mind-boggling. And actually, it's an area which can truly bring voice of grassroots to the ecosystem. Whereas today we just do, survey of few people and try to come up with policies or solutions. Whereas this can truly bring the voice of large grassroots.
Sure. Thank you, Rajiv. And I think, yes, I think importantly, like you share, as we wait for AI to evolve and for more opportunities to really engage in different languages across the country. What's important is that all of these solutions can be applied in so many domains. And like you say, I think both health and agriculture already have quite a few examples. So thank you for sharing that. Aziz, I will come back to you. What's the one thing you wish funders understood better about supporting tech-enabled interventions in education?
Yeah, I think we've learned this the hard way, but I think technology lets you, if you use it properly, lets you actually get very minute data of usage and how people are engaging or interacting with something, right? And I think a lot of funders have been used to sort of data collected from feet on street, right? So to give you an example, suppose I send my staff to meet teachers and teach them, right, in a district. So theoretically, I say that, look, my staff has gone and visited everyone and they've all learned and they're all perfect, right? So then the answer that comes back is whatever, 2,000 teachers are now teaching very well or whatever, right? In our case, in technology, we can actually say that 2,000 teachers say are on WhatsApp touch with us, but only 1,500 of them actually ever responded, and about 1,200 of them are actually doing activities regularly. And this is the this is the monthly active user, this is the weekly active user, and the daily active user. So we actually track that funnel very similarly, and Karishma mentioned that, this is again something that we borrowed from the for-profit sector, right? Because in the past, we haven't had the ability in the non-profit space to be able to look at it in that level of depth, right? We track these funnels and we operate based on that. And we used to share it with funders in the early days. Even now we do with some of them. But the question that comes up back is, why are only 60% using? Why are 100% not using, right? And so I think, the benchmarking of what is possible or even achievable is not there, right? Either through digital or offline. in offline, you say that so many people were impacted, but honestly, how many of them are actually using it in the classroom? If you've given a manual, that doesn't mean people are reading it, right? So I think that way, I think it's important for us to come up with benchmarks of what is good, right, in terms of the outputs, and what that also translates to that in terms of learning outcomes, and for funders to then come up with a theory saying that, look, at this cost, this person can achieve this engagement, which leads to this outcomes. Is that something I'm comfortable with, right? So the whole sector has to become very comfortable in that way. And the same is in agriculture, the same is in health, the same is in any other sector that we look at. And so I think those efforts are important, rather than just saying that, oh, why is this 10% not doing, or why did this particular person not do, right? So I think that is one thing that is a work in progress. And I think not just funders, honestly, organizations also don't know. When we started, we were the only people doing this. We didn't know if what we are doing is good or bad, right? We were comparing with Duolingo or somebody else. And so eventually we came up with some benchmarks, and we did some randomized control trials, and we learned that, okay, this much engagement is leading to this much outcome, so this is the engagement to drive to. But again, very hard to sort of explain and convince funders. And I think so this new sort of world where we're getting so much data and so much analysis, we need funders to engage more deeply with that sort of thing as well.
Wow. Yeah, I think, Aziz, what I'm hearing you say is that, and I think this is also a point where, both sides of the table need to have more open and honest communication. As nonprofits, one needs to really be confident enough to communicate what is a realistic goal and what is an achievable goal in that context. And I think for donors also to understand that it's they need to learn from their partner organizations on realities on the ground and what is truly achievable. So thank you for that. Karishma and Rajiv, any points that you'd want to add there, and tips for your peers in the philanthropy world when it comes to this? Karishma, I'll go to you first.
Just to add that there's a lot to learn from each other, Aditi, as you said, very often donors and NGOs don't speak the same language. There's a lot of mistrust. There's a lot of, oh, but why can't he just do this? Or why doesn't he understand my problems? Like it's a very fraught conversation. It has to be dealt with a lot of kind of maturity and like mutual respect. Just keep an open mind, have a growth mindset. Say, I'll change my mind. I've changed my mind about what I thought was real. Go and see the real beneficiaries in action, understand the problems in detail, map it out, think of a system, think of systems map, get kind of like alignment. It's a huge problem. If we can fix this, we'll fix so many problems in the country. It's just this little bottleneck of conversation between the donors and the NGOs.
Lovely. Thank you. Rajiv?
Yeah, I have to completely echo what Karishma is saying, that the communication, and in my case, I will also add the grassroots sector. Because if you come to some of these places, if you look at the funding which is going today, is to the geographies where economic development has happened, and not to geographies where economic development is lagging. So reaching out to areas where it is there, it's a difficult task. The second thing is, it's not simpler solutions. They take time, they take patience. It was our learning that you have to first, it's an old saying that you have to unlearn before you learn. But, we have really, really gone through it. And coming from the corporate world, listed companies, quarter to quarter, results to be given, to realizing that some things take actually generations to change and does not even happen in a short term. So I will say, yeah, these are the important things which we will ask the donors.
Thank you. Lots of food for thought there for our philanthropists and their teams. And I'm surely going to keep this in mind when we work with our network philanthropists at AIP. So thank you for those insights. Let's now move to some questions from the audience. Before that, really a shout out to the audience. Thank you for engaging with us on the chat. Some of you have shared questions earlier, through the registration as well. So it's lovely to see, so many of you being so thoughtful about this topic. We did try to, draft our questions for the panel based on questions that most of you have shared, and I hope we've done justice to that. Aziz, you've touched upon this, but there's a question from Shweta Gaur on how do NGOs really leverage technology to make impact transparent for the funder, right? So, while you've talked about realistic goals, but tell me, what are the indicators that you would track beyond outreach right? And to really showcase that you are driving systemic change?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think their funders do ask for, and I think rightly, for outcome data as well, right? So it's very easy to give input and output data, right, in your theory of change. So, number of children who have your app, number of children who use it, right? So those things are like relatively easy to report. But I think what eventually sort of convinces any donor or funder is the final impact, whether it's on like a teacher slash parent, right? In education case, or it could be a farmer, or it could be a nurse, right? And then what is the final outcome on the final sort of person you're trying to help, right? Whether it's a kid, whether it's a senior citizen or whatever. So I think those fundamental things honestly don't change. Those things are still required, right? Because you might get a pass for 2-3 years, but eventually you'll have to sort of show that. So in our case, we have a whole monitoring and evaluation group that actually like goes in person, offers sample of children, which is a representative sample of our whole user base, and actually does a baseline in person, end line in person, looks at those differences, right, for any of the stakeholders we work with. So I would say that we should continue investing in those sorts of things. Those are also eventually like the only way for us to really be sure that what we are doing is working, right? Because you could have the highest engagement in the world, but maybe among people who might anyway have engaged or on the wrong topics, etc. Right? So it's too easy to become entertainment if you're technology, right? And so I think keeping yourself honest is there. Beyond that, more inventively, I think there are ways that we can actually do, which honestly we are not doing at Rocket Learning, but I always think about of being able to showcase impact much better, right? For example, you would actually get photos from a particular school or a particular clinic from the ground, right? And have that uploaded and send it to a donor saying that, look, like every month, like this is actual like kid or nurse talking about the impact and all of that, right? So I think this is pretty easy now to collect and to map and send to some sort of funder, right? And it takes away that whole problem of the black box, right? That my money is going somewhere, especially with scale programs, right? My money is going somewhere, and you telling me some million number, some 100,000 number, and what's the real situation, right? And that I want to know that I am impacting like a specific person in a specific area, right? So this can really make it real for partners, and probably doesn't require field teams to do too much, right? Like you go on field and you take a photo or a video with a kid and you send it, and that's the best testimonial. So I think that I feel somebody should do, and if somebody makes a solution for that, please let me know too.
Lovely. So that's a shout out to all the technology providers in the audience. We do have some of them. And in fact, we had a question on, what is the role that technology providers can play in expediting the impact of AI. While Aziz has already touched upon that, Rajiv, I would ask you to add to that.
So I think the first is that, like I mentioned, it has to be, I think we have to talk to people. You see, we don't start any initiative, whether tech or non-tech, without having spoken to 50 people in the sector. That's a minimum count which we have. And only after speaking to them, we believe we can give them solutions which are, which make sense for them. And then we run a pilot. And after that, we find we are able to scale very, very rapidly. So I will say be patient initially and then scale. Don't start with a day one scaling because you don't know what you will run into. So first go to the ground, talk to people, understand with an open mind, run a pilot, learn from the pilot, and then take it to the larger. And it becomes much, much easier that way.
Wonderful. Thank you there. And lastly, we've again, Aziz touched upon making the community aware, and we've had questions during the registration, and we have one from Aditi Desai here as well. One saying, what are really the risks, and what would you call out as the 2-3 points that people should really keep in mind with respect to AI? And I would say a linked question there is, again, how do you protect communities, against misinformation on AI? And I will, get a last thought from all three of you on that. Rajiv, why don't you continue?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because, the point is this is all across the world. And when you go to vulnerable communities, it becomes that much more important. And that's where my submission will be that the amount of testing, if I can call it. You do it before you go to these communities. Don't use them as your trial ground because they are cheaply available. But really first clean it out before you go to them, because they don't know, and their ability to recover will be weaker. So just because they're vulnerable, I think we should be very, very sensitive to that. So I will say it becomes even more, there is a more of our responsibility to make sure that we take care of it.
Thank you, Rajiv. Karishma?
I'd say I'll go for specifically for like education first. If the goal is to create a self-driven learner, right? That is our eventual goal, because learning is a lifelong process. You need strong foundations. So imagine a calculator when it first came out, right? We said that we need to still teach children addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, get them to a level of mastery, then hand over the calculator to them. To then it becomes grunt work. So then you can use the calculator. So you need to let students build your foundations first at that particular age and then delegate the work to AI. Also, you have to be a domain expert. We keep saying that, oh, tech is going to kind of replace these experts. It's not. An expert with AI is way more powerful than someone who understands AI, not kind of superficially. You can see in written work, when you have a really good like author who uses AI for brainstorming versus a kind of novice who sort of generates content with AI, it's very clear that there's a big difference. So domain expertise is not going anywhere. In fact, it will become much more strong and powerful. The second thing is you need to think about so because you want to become a lifelong learner, what is the process of how you learn best? So you need to see, okay, fine, do I do research? Do I do I kind of analyze something? Do I write? Do I make notes? So what is that learning process that is optimal for you? And then use AI and say, okay, in this part, I can delegate this to AI. This part I have to do myself. It has to be done by me. So that is how you sort of, weave in like technology towards the larger goal. On a more macro scale, across the sectors, I don't think we've had enough time to think deeply in terms of philosophy about the second and third order effects of AI. It's too fast. The speed of innovation has been so fast that we've not had time to just breathe and analyze what will happen. But I'd still say let the tech people do their tech thing. I think they should keep on doing what they're doing well. It's us as implementers, as philanthropists, as practitioners who should be the ones to think of the long-term implications, asking questions like, how will this technology scale? What additional problems will this cause if it scales in terms of equity, in terms of, cost? What are the kind of edge cases? If a bad actor sort of, kind of chances, upon this, what are the kind of long-term kind of implications of using this tech for our students, for our, for our beneficiaries? And also learn from history. We've had these waves before. There have been waves constantly, the computer, the internet, the AI is the most recent wave. There's a lot of history and analysis on technology diffusion and kind of societal kind of impact. Some fears are highly overblown, some fears are real. How is this wave similar to the past and how is it different? That will require a lot of deep thinking from us, from our perspective. The government, right? These are very tough decisions for the government to make, because how do you create policies that balance the protection of people, but also not curb kind of innovation? I don't have an answer to what the government should do it. That is not my field. But the job is not just the government. So we can't delegate all the responsibility to the government that, oh, you guys need to monitor this. We have the power to do it ourselves. At the end, I'll say it's a tool, right? So every tool has to be trained, has to be taught, has to be practiced. So like that, for us as well, our beneficiaries, they have to be trained in this. It has to be a serious kind of effort to make sure that people understand hallucinations, understand the limits of the tech, and practice it constantly. The more you practice it, the more, fearless you become about it as well. So.
Thanks, Karishma, and I think a lot of takeaways from that one. But I'm going to jump to Aziz before I summarize.
Yeah, I think Rajiv and Karishma have basically covered it all. But two quick cents. I think a lot of the work of technology, people working on this, whether technologists or social entrepreneurs, is going to be the boundary conditions on what can be said by the AI model or whatever, right? Eventually, you can train. I mean, there'll be a lot of data and information to train on. But what is it not allowed to say, right? And so for our like AI bots and all, that has been like actually a lot of the time and testing. And as Rajiv said, you can't like throw it out to to 100,000 people in one go. Like in our WhatsApp based like static content model, we actually went with like large scale. In this model, we actually like while we have 4 million users, we went to like 100 and had a human in the loop, like monitoring every conversation live to see what was happening, right? And then to figure out the iteration. So I think that becomes sort of quite critical. And I would also say that there are some use cases where the technology may not be ready yet. I put this in the chat as well, right? Like there's relatively less harm of sending a slightly suboptimal activity to a teacher to do, relatively, right? But to prescribe a wrong medicine to a pregnant woman is really, really bad, right? Or to diagnose a incorrect sort of issue that she may be facing. So in some of these cases, we do have to rely on the experts, as Karishma said, and help them do the job better, or have whatever there is, whatever output is being thrown up, being verified by an expert or something, right? Or maybe, and we maybe will not use AI for that, at least as of now, right? But for other use cases where okay, 90% accuracy is okay, right? Because the 10% like wrong cases are not going to do much harm, right? Or they won't do harm, they may not do benefit, but they won't do harm. Those are the use cases that we can really focus on also right now.
Thank you, Aziz. I think lots of food for thought for all of us here. A lot of takeaways for, I think, everybody in the ecosystem, for those of us providing interventions on the ground, for philanthropists, for the government to play its role, for technology providers to play their role. I think a big takeaway, of course, is be thoughtful about how you use technology. Don't fear technology. It's not replacing you in the system, because you're the experts in your domain, whether it's education, agriculture, health, climate, etc. But a big takeaway from Karishma there, which is involve a domain expert for technology and make life tough for them. Ask them. Unfortunately, it's time for us to say bye now. So a very big thank you, Rajiv, Karishma, and Aziz, for sharing insights from your rich experience over the years. Each one of us here is going to go back with a lot of takeaways from this session. A big shout out to the entire team at CSIP and the Lilly School of Philanthropy for initiating these dialogues and putting these sessions together today. And it's been extremely encouraging to see interest from such a large and diverse audience. Our audience includes philanthropists, nonprofits, people from the tech industry, academia, truly the entire ecosystem. So that's been extremely encouraging for us. And thank you so much for your interest. And with this, I will hand over to my colleagues at CSIP for their closing remarks. Rekha, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Aditi. Thank you, Aziz, Karishma, Rajiv. Thank you so much for insightful thoughts and sharing your personal stories. I know we have like quick 30 seconds. Thank you, everyone. And with this, we are closing our global convening. Hope to see you in the next convening. Thank you, everyone, those who have joined.
Thank you all again. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Who are listed on the platform. And then we've also got an impact management system that we're looking at integrating on top of that as well, with this new UNDP SDG impact standard, the ISO 53001, I think it is. So it provides that data, that trust, that security for organizations to give overseas. It's early days, and we'll be launching it publicly in the next year or so. But this is really, I think, a great example. And as you said, Mark, looking at the region as a whole, I think that the regulatory and legal environment looks somewhat challenging, but I would say Singapore is certainly a bright spark within that context.
Thank you. That's very helpful and some great examples. Looking a little bit more globally and coming back to Mark, one of the things that I found of interest in the GPI report was also some initiatives in Europe, like Transnational Giving Europe, a platform for making it easy within the region to give, and also some regional tax incentives. I wonder, Mark, if you could think of or share about some other cross-border giving models or lessons from other regions that you think might be interesting for those working in Asia.
Thank you. Pleased to. As Sue and Tristan have pointed out, while the regulatory barriers and the regulatory environment in Asia is difficult, there are bright spots. There are initiatives, as they pointed out. There are places like Singapore where good things are going on. And there's a variety of ways of trying to address some of the regulatory and policy barriers which exist. The regional European efforts, as you point out, Dana, are one such way of doing that. We've seen that first in Europe in a variety of ways, not only the regional giving efforts, but also the idea of some kind of joint legal framework document that would cover some of these activities in Europe. And we've seen explorations of this in other parts of the world as well, but probably Europe is a bit ahead of some other regions. We're also seeing countries talking with each other in some other parts of the world to try to lower some of these regulatory barriers on a country-by-country basis or in a collection of countries. So there's a variety of things. Those are just two examples, one of which you started with. There are a variety of ways in which governments, philanthropies, or others are trying to lower these barriers. The intermediaries, of whom we have a number on this call, the intermediaries that try to move philanthropic and social investment funding across border are constantly on the search for innovative regulatory and financial methods to try to move these funds, of course, in a lawful manner. And so we see a number of different initiatives and innovations, in effect, bubbling up from below as donors and intermediaries try to find ways around or across some of the regulatory barriers. I'll stop there. Sue and Tristan may have more to say about this as well.
Is there anything you would like to add, Tristan or Sue, to what Mark was just saying?
Yeah, so I mean, just building on some of the innovation or adaptation that we've been involved in at ABPN. I mean, I think they say often that necessity is the mother of invention, and I think one of the interesting outcomes of the pandemic was the emergence of a new stream of work within ABPN, which is our pooled funds unit or business. And it really came because our members said we need to get money to frontline organizations quickly. How do we do that? And you referenced Naina earlier on, Sue, and she, as you know, she doesn't like to give up. So she said, right, yes, of course we can do that. And of course, then we had to figure out how we were going to go about doing it. So we established a number of pooled funds. The first was a COVID relief fund. And that was to enable us to then give from a range of global north philanthropies to some of the frontline organizations working across South and Southeast Asia in COVID relief. And what was interesting about that was just the learning that we gained from that process, because of course we wanted just to make sure we could give that money as quick as we could. And I think because of the urgency of the situation, donors were willing to be a bit braver, a bit more courageous, and a bit less strict with their traditional due diligence. So in some respects, it was a great opportunity for innovation. And it really led to this a much wider program of pooled funds. And to date, we've given over $30 million in a whole range of different initiatives, from gender equality to maternal health and child nutrition to youth mental health. And really by pooling capital, what we've and building trust in being able to disperse funds across the region. And we do that through a range of intermediaries, some of which I can see on the call here today, the likes of Myriad Alliance or Give to Asia, as they were before, to actually, and I think, so I think that's really interesting in how we've seen that adaptation happen. And I would encourage more of that, more sort of hustle attitude. And I think as long as you can, long as you, this is something that's I think really key to ABPN, as long as you maintain a core neutrality in the way you're doing it and you're focusing on the impact you're trying to create, then you can build that trust with local counterparts, with local governments, to find ways around some of these legal and regulatory challenges as well.
Excellent, thank you. We received some questions from the audience, of which a lot of people coming from India, but also representing organizations interested in receiving funds from overseas. And one of the questions was about how to kind of enable funds to receive funds from overseas. So I wondered, Sue, as an organization that helps donors deliver funds overseas, what are they looking for? What advice might you offer to organizations that are seeking funds from overseas on readiness or what they can do? And somebody asked specifically about the SDG scorecard, if that helps, or other things? Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's a great question. I think as a community foundation, we're always trying to find that balance between having enough rigor for accountability and confidence in the giving, because those are some of the challenges, but also recognizing that, the social impact organizations on the front line are the ones doing the really hard work, and we don't want to be overly burdensome. So I think it's really finding a balance between giving confidence and to everyone involved without actually being overly taxing. I think, yeah, just some of the really basic things on like I always say, it's in two buckets. One is really just the governance and compliance. So ensuring that you have, your transparent financial records, that there's, clear governance structure around your board, and that these are things that can be easily prepared and shown. But then there's the intangible, and this is where it's tricky because it's being able to really tell your story, and it's the data plus the story, which I think is across any kind of giving and relationship, where people want to have the data to feel that that's it's backed, but really they're inspired by the story. So I think having a really coherent way to be able to show and convey to someone who isn't familiar maybe with your work or your geography, how the work you're doing is not just having an impact in your own mission, but how it's having an effect with working with others, partnerships. It doesn't always have to be an opportunity to scale, and that's something we're always letting donors know. Not everything has to lead to scale. Sometimes just doing something really, really well and being able to continue doing that, innovating within that, bringing others along on the journey. So I don't want anyone to think, I know that there are some funders who it's all about scale, but I think for us, we're really trying to work with donors who are at any stage of their giving journey to realize that impact comes in all shapes and sizes. And so really good giving, it's not just about the amount, but it's the how that we really want donors to be able to give in ways that match the intent of an organization's need.
Thank you, Sue. And kind of on a related note, there was a discussion in the previous session about diaspora giving, and I do wonder, it's something that we've talked about in Vietnam, about how organizations should look overseas for Vietnamese living overseas, and foundations run by Vietnamese. Are these conversations happening in your organizations? Are there different policies in the region for expediting diaspora giving, or this question is for anyone on the panel that would like to address it?
I can start. By all means, diaspora giving is a trend that we're seeing. We've actually been approached by specifically diaspora from India and from China, who are looking to just build on some of the comments that Tristan made around collaborative giving and pooled funds. We're seeing diaspora looking to really come together and not just give alone, but give with others, form giving circles, so that in kind of giving circles and learning circles. So being able to really bring together, there's a social element to it, but it's also really wanting to give better, and seeing that, of course, giving with a group, giving towards issues versus just single organizations is a really more impactful way to go. I haven't seen any specific regulatory issues around diaspora specifically. It's tied to the country of origin and what those specific requirements are.
Thank you. Let's see. There was a question that came from a participant from Mexico, and she was asking, are there any success stories of organizations that have been able to circumvent restrictive policy that limit cross-border philanthropy? Does anybody know of any success stories like that from the perspective of an organization? And she explained that in Mexico, compliance laws greatly restrict the way that they can receive and the amounts they can receive. Mark, can you help?
Well, just a couple very quick thoughts on this. Sometimes giving to a different kind of organization within the origin country helps. And while the barriers to that cross-border giving by diaspora or others should be roughly equivalent, regardless of the source of the funds, sometimes in reality they are not. So let me give you an example. For an American organization or donor that wants to give into, say, China, where the regulatory barriers to the foreign funding coming into China are both high and consistent, it may be difficult to organize that directly as an individual donor or as a foundation. But giving to a 501c3 in the United States that has certain kinds of permissions in China to carry out project activities in China may be a way of funding activities in China. That's even after the fact that China has a high and consistent set of barriers to incoming funding. So doing something different in the country of origin sometimes helps. Sometimes, this does not work, for example, in my view, in India, but sometimes giving through a third location helps. And I'm not saying a third country, but I'm saying a third location. So we are seeing diaspora and other givers in the United States who wish to contribute, say, to projects in China, finding that at times and with restrictions, so not freely, it can be useful to find a way of giving through Hong Kong. That the Hong Kong transfer, distribution of these kinds of funds into China may sometimes be easier than when the funds come directly from the United States or other countries. So those are two things that come to mind. In effect, switching who the donor is in the country of origin, or giving through a third place. Again, I'm not saying a third country, I'm saying a third place, like Hong Kong. But again, Tristan, Sue, or others may have lots of other examples of this, and it would be very useful. This may have been done and I haven't seen it. It would be very useful, at least in Asia, for someone to put together a website or a recurring updatable report on, in effect, how various groups are managing these policy issues, what I will call with some trepidation workarounds, which is not necessarily the best term to use in highly restrictive countries, but a way of keeping date on these methods. I'll stop there.
That's a great idea. Sue, did you want to add something, or Tristan? Sorry.
I'll just add that it's I hear you what you're saying, Mark. It would be great if there was sort of a directory of some of these innovative ways of, ensuring success around the giving. I think sometimes we find there's and of course transparency is super important in this work, but sometimes donors who are looking to give in different ways aren't necessarily delighted to be on lists to show the ways that they're being creative to make things happen. We also have an intermediary, just to back up what Mark was saying, giving into China. We ourselves are an intermediary in Singapore, and we've had donors work through ACF. We have a second intermediary in China that we work through, who then takes care of the clearance on the ground in China. So that's one way. Intermediaries are really, I think, what make the engines work for some of these challenging situations.
Excellent. And with some of the requirements in the pre-approval processes in Vietnam, we used to try and have all of our funders in one country give to one intermediary so that we could have one transfer over. And it was much smoother for getting the approval process through. So there's different ways of doing things. Tristan, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I wanted to, just sort of way up on the other end of the spectrum, and particularly in humanitarian crisis context. I know that in Myanmar, there's been some really creative ways of getting funding into the country, particularly through, for example, business leaders who can't get money out, who will then donate locally in return for getting transfers into their accounts overseas, which is a way then to kind of get money to communities, and particularly in those, after, for example, the recent earthquake up in Mandalay, for example, or other extreme events that have happened in recent years. So, that might not be a blueprint, but it's just does demonstrate that there is a huge amount of creativity when there's an urgent need for funding to get to the reach places in the region.
Great, thank you. I have a question. I've tried to engage the audience a little bit. I'm going to try and post it here. So what strategies, it's for all of us to think about, what strategies or partnerships could philanthropy actors pursue to overcome legal, regulatory, or trust-related barriers to cross-border giving? We've heard some, and there might be others in the room. So if you're listening and willing, please feel free to type in your thoughts here and suggestions. And if any more come to mind from our speakers, we can include those as well. We have just 10 minutes before we have to hand over to Ginny for a closing, but I did want to make sure that we think proactively about what more can be done and what maybe we can do together. I wanted to start with Mark, because your unique role as a professor, a former academic, a practitioner, are there roles for academia? I see that we have some other researchers on this call too. Is there a role or partnerships between practice and research that need to take place to support cross-border giving or to enable some of these innovations to succeed?
Thanks, Dana. And again, very briefly, certainly there's a role for research in this, whether that's based in academic centers or based directly in foundations or other philanthropic organizations. We do need more research on the cross-border issues. To come back to your first question, we do a lot of talking in this field about ways of coping with regulatory barriers, workarounds, working through different kinds of organizations, intermediaries, things like that. That's all important. But I think there's a role for groups of philanthropic organizations and donors to approach restrictive governments directly. Governments that have not publicly shown a willingness to think about flexibility on the regulatory barriers. I'm thinking particularly of places like China and India, but that might be quietly receptive to quiet discussions with groups of donors that want to explain that they want to contribute to social development in those countries, and perhaps some discussions about some aspects of the regulatory barriers would be useful. I know that's occurred occasionally, quietly, both with the Indian authorities and, although it may surprise some people on the call, with the Chinese authorities as well, since the overseas NGO law came into effect in China at the beginning of 2017. I don't want to overemphasize in any way the possibilities of regulatory change, but I think it's important not just to look for ways to lawfully bring money into countries, but also to try to look at ways of talking with governments about other models in the region, Singapore and others, and beginning to reduce some regulatory barriers. I'll stop there. Thanks, Dana.
That's very great advice. And I saw thumbs up from Tristan as you were saying it. Did you want to elaborate, Tristan?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to make a very similar point. I mean, if you look at the policy innovation that's happened across Southeast Asia, South Asia over the last sort of 10 years or so, particularly in the inclusive business, social purpose organization space, you've seen a quite significant innovation. So you look at the Thai Social Enterprise Promotion Act, you look at even the social enterprise definition you have in Vietnam. Now, of course, I will say there's a huge gap between the policy and implementation, but nevertheless, we have seen governments implement policies for social purpose businesses. Now, I don't think that's surprising that that's happened at the same time as you've seen the sort of more restrictive policies around non-profit organizations, because of the perception that governments have around what the purpose of those different types of entities are. I think at the moment there's a huge opportunity to build trust with governments, for them to understand the actual huge potential that philanthropy has to really supplement their own welfare policies in particular countries across the region, and not look at it as a something small or something that's kind of just picking up small problems in particular countries, but actually look at philanthropy as a true partner in your welfare social contract that you have with your citizens. When you look at the growth of wealth in the region. I think the potential for philanthropy, which I don't think we fully understand in terms of a number, is really significant. So I think that actually, Mark, I think I would totally agree with you. Working through the likes of UNSCAP to build a sort of cohesive, coherent policy program to engage in dialogue with governments could lead to some really interesting outcomes. We saw, for example, in ASEAN, the Inclusive Business Action Framework that was agreed by the ASEAN a couple of years back. We've seen particularly movements around social enterprise led by the Thai government during their ASEAN presidency a number of years back. So I think there is receptiveness, but it's about building trust between policymakers to show them that philanthropy should be their partners and not their adversaries in trying to solve some of these major problems that we face. And I think in the context that was particularly discussed in the first panel around the retreat of aid, this does really offer an opportunity for a new way of thinking about how we build our social welfare system. So I would really concur that engaging governments with some trusted philanthropic partners in the region as well as globally is the way forward.
Wonderful. And thank you to the audience members who've contributed, both sharing that they are supporting, efforts to make it possible to transfer funds overseas, but also offering some examples of what's happening in different countries. That's really helpful. Appreciate your sharing. So just maybe we have time for each person to share one final thought. And so I'll just maybe a probing question of asking if there's one shift that you think is key to unlocking the full potential of cross-border giving. What is that shift? What would you like it to be? Can we start with Sue?
What I would like it to be. First of all, I would say that the word trust has come up a number of times, and I think it's just critical in every aspect. So whether it's unlocking more giving, unlocking cross-border giving, the idea of sort of the essence of Asian philanthropy really has trust built into it, and maybe a slightly different tone than other places in the world is that philanthropy works with government, alongside government, and is working to pass the baton, not down the line, but right as you go is what we've seen it really work successfully. I would also say trust takes time. And so to have to really bring more donors and funders and community into the space together to co-create will help to, I think, create the runway. I think when we are able to bring homegrown Asian philanthropy to really, especially after what we've seen happen with the US funding freeze, really a promotion of homegrown Asian philanthropy, co-creating solutions with community groups, and then, of course, bringing in global funders and global partners to work alongside is we are seeing as sort of or I'd like to see as the recipe for really building trust for lasting partnerships and sustained change.
Thanks, Sue. Tristan?
I think the word that comes to my mind is collaboration, particularly with the traditional global North philanthropies and the emerging philanthropic actors in the region, and building true values-based collaboration in addressing issues. I think is a way that we could really start to see capital move across the region. Yeah, and particularly focusing on issues as opposed to structure. So really focusing on the key issues that the region faces that are very aligned with national and regional priorities, whether that's energy transition targets, whether that's around nature, whether that's health or gender equality, really aligning it with government priorities in addressing them. I think that would help then to build the trust to be more welcoming to incoming funding from overseas.
Thank you. And Mark?
There's a fundamental contradiction here, which is that building trust, building collaboration, aligning with government priorities, to use a phrase that's been used in both of these sessions, the main session and this, necessarily means that philanthropy is narrowing its focus in many cases to what government wants to do and to being an analog to the provision of government social services. Philanthropy has a broader role than that. Philanthropy has a risk-taking and challenging role that some countries, many countries that have restrictive barriers and policies just don't want to see. And so that's going to be a significant contradiction and challenge for philanthropy going forward. in order to move money across borders into restrictive places, sometimes philanthropy is going to really have to narrow what it seeks to do and work very hard to support the work of governments. And for many philanthropists, donors, and others around the world, that's not the only role for philanthropy. Figuring out that contradiction, figuring out how to get money into places without entirely subsuming one's work to the policy preferences of government is a significant challenge in the years ahead. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mark. And I need to hand over to Ginny for the last 5 minutes, but I did want to just make a note of appreciation to all three of you for spending your time to share your experiences and your ideas about cross-border giving. Thank you so much. It was very helpful and very insightful. And I also want to appreciate Ginny and her team at CSIP, who have been amazing partners, both in developing the GPEI reports, but also putting this session together, leading it all. So thank you, Ginny, and over to you.
Thank you so much. This was a wonderful conversation for me. I am not an expert in cross-border philanthropy, so I'm going to give you my perspective. In what I heard, the policy landscape is shifting very quickly. The way countries and nonprofits are adapting, or how they might adapt itself, is moving very quickly, and it's probably going to keep changing for a while. So the complexity is very interesting. You almost need to know what happened a month ago, the policy change a month ago in this country versus in this other country. Mark, your idea of giving through Hong Kong was just so interesting. So it's good times, bad times, it's complex times, but this is the time when intermediaries can step up and abstract away the complexity to some extent. Hopefully the dust will settle. Nobody can predict when. But like I said in the earlier session, during the hardest times is when the most creative ideas come forth. So I think we'll look back maybe a few years from now and talk about, that back then in 2025, while all this was going on, that's when this idea was born. On that optimistic note, I thank you so much for your time and sharing so generously. Dana, thank you for being a fantastic partner the past few weeks. We put this together. Mark, we've been old friends. CSIP has been a friend to you for a while. So very nice to connect with you. Tristan, you as well. Hopefully I'll get to see you all at the EVPN conference. I think it's in a few weeks from now. Thank you very much for your time. And with that, I'm going to close the convening. We did take a few questions today, but we're going to share them with the panelists since we didn't have time to address all of it, and you'll have the opportunity to answer it after the fact. Thank you very much. Have a good day wherever you are, and see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.